Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. This is Patty Donohue. I'm the project manager for Open CCCApply here at the CCC Technology Center. It is Friday, February 19th, and we're about to start the 2 o'clock International Application preview. I want to just say that you are the lucky 50 people who are able to attend. I was supposed to have a 200-seat license today. They assured me that that we'd be able to seat 200 people, and Zoom, we had some technical problems with Zoom. So if you're viewing this recording and you were one of the few that were blocked, I apologize for that. Luckily, we can record this, so hopefully you would still get the same experience that those of you who are in the room will get. Please feel free to keep your questions. If you're not here with us today, keep your questions, and you can send them to me via email. I'll post that by the end of the session. And what we're doing is, due to time, because we're going to look at the entire international application today, because it's new. We're not focusing on changes in development. We're going to take a look at the whole thing, start to finish. I'm going to show you just a couple quick slides, a timeline on the release that we have planned, and then we'll get going with that. But what we're asking is that you put your questions in the chat window. So we have all the phones and all the lines muted. We're going to try to have some Q&A at the end. We didn't have any time for the last session, so we may or may not. So load up that chat with questions, and then at the end, we'll download them, aggregate all the questions. I will put an FAQ style response to those questions together. And then on Monday, when I post the recording for this session on the CCCApply project site, I'll go ahead and post that FAQ there as well. So, so feel free to ask questions. We'll get to them. And okay, so let's just go over some quick dates here real quick, and then we'll get started. Let me see that one slide. So just kind of a recap, of course, today's February 19th. It's the college previews. We have 6 weeks from today until the March 31st release. So March 31st, same date that the CCCApply annual update release happens, we are going to launch the international app. Between now and then, there's a couple key dates. So on March 10th, coming right up, couple weeks, all of the code that we're working on now. So what you're going to see today is on the development server. So it's not available for anyone to see today, outside of this demo. But we'll be rolling that to the pilot site. So on March 10th, and you have access to the pilot site, and I will remind you what that access is. But you can go in and look at the international app, play with it, submit some pilot/test applications, and you can look at the International Data Dictionary. So that'll be released on March 10th, and then the annual report. So the annual report there's not going to be a whole lot about the international app on it, but there will be a section talking about what it includes, where to find resources like the data dictionary and the implementation materials. But March 10th is basically the date that you can get started putting together your download file for international. We have all the data fields set, looking at the data dictionary. There's no logic. There's no residency logic in the international app. So it makes, for a much easier implementation, actually. So that's March 10th, and I will send out emails to everybody who registered for this preview, and I'll do a blanket, email blast to everybody with this information. March 22nd is the CCCApply annual workshop. This year it's at Fullerton College in Southern California. Every year we alternate between NorCal and Southern California. This year it's Southern California. If you haven't registered yet, please go to the CCCApplyproject.org website and click on the events page and register for the workshop, because we're filling up fast. If we hit 300 participants, we have to close shop. So, and I think we're at about 276. So we have room for about 25 more people. So if you haven't registered, please do that before we shut that down. And then March 31st is our big launch, and we're really excited. So this will be posted on the project site. Don't want to detail this out. It's just a few more details of our release schedule. Let's see. And, you know, the international, it's the same thing. So, you know, March 10th, you can go on the project site. The release notes will be posted, the data dictionary, and then the launch. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Tyler Bain. He is a brilliant developer who works for Unicon, who develops our application, and he's going to demonstrate the account creation and the international app with my help. You know, I might jump in and help him with anything, but he knows it as well as I. So Tyler, go ahead and take control of the screen share, or I'll stop screen sharing. Let's see about this. There we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Patty. I'm not sure that it deserves to be called brilliant, but I will accept that, graciously, hopefully. So today, as Patty said, I was going to do a full run-through of the international application and just show the various features that we have, mostly centering on differences that the international application has from the standard domestic application. As Patty said, if you have any questions, please post them to the chat. I know we have a couple of people in there that are answering some questions, and then also they will be compiled into frequently asked questions after the presentation. And Patty, of course, feel free to jump in at any point to add more depth to the presentation that I'm giving, because I know that you know a lot more about the background of some of these changes than I do. I'm more just into the technical know-how of how it's done. So without further ado, I shall go ahead and sign into our international application. And the first page that we'll land on is the very familiar My Applications page that we have. In general, this is very similar to the domestic application. If you were part of the last presentation that was seeing the features that we're going to be rolling out in our release in March for the domestic application, that it now has an auto-population functionality, but as Patty had said in that demo, this is only for that was only for the domestic application, so international does not have that feature, unfortunately. So the other changes from the domestic application is just the title of the page is just the international application as opposed to apply. And one thing that I just wanted to point out that I'm not sure that we got a chance to show was across all of the applications in the CCC ecosystem, we've just added the user's CCC ID as another little bit of information that's up here in their upper right corner next to their actual, their first and last name. So we've added that CCC ID there in case they need to use that to reference themselves to the help desk or other situations where that might be handy. Continuing on from the My Applications page, we're going to land on the introduction page for the international application. There isn't really any difference on this page from what we have on the domestic application. So I'll go ahead and continue on to the enrollment page. Here on the enrollment page, we do have the familiar term and major and educational goals that we have from the domestic application. For terms, you might notice that we have some different titles here. Just the way that we've named our titles is just to showcase the fact that we are pulling from a different set of terms for the international application compared to the domestic application. However, I just wanted to point out, since this was a question some other time when we demoed this, we're not appending the word international to the name of the terms. This is just something that we're using for our test cases. Continuing on to the majors, we also have unique majors for the international application. compared to what we have for the domestic application. So that's two separate sets of terms and two separate sets of majors for between those two applications. And then on the educational goal dropdown, we have a much smaller number of choices for the user. Those of you familiar with the domestic application will remember that there's upward of 10 or so different options that the user can choose. For international students, we've just pared that down to 4 simple choices. And another difference is if the user chooses one of the options that states that they're going to go on to a 4-year institution after their stay at your community college, they get an additional free text box to enter the major that they intend to pursue at that 4-year institution if it differs from their major. Now this is an optional field, so the user is not required to enter data into that field. I'm not sure that there's too much else to add to this. Patty, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
No, that's it. Those educational goals, that was defined by the International Advisory Committee. So we pared down what we had in the domestic app to what your requirements are. That's it.
Okay. The next page that we're going to be moving on to is the account address information page. This is very similar to the the domestic application as well. One thing I guess that should be noted is that if the user does not have a social security number, which is probably going to be the majority of users in this international application, if you do not provide a social security number, you might recall from the domestic application that there's a large yellow box that shows up here as a warning to the users to try to encourage them to enter their SSN. We've significantly lowered the severity of how the user is going to perceive that message just by using plain text to state that they have not provided a social security number. That's pretty much it for this section. And then on the next section, we do have the same current mailing address you might be familiar with in the domestic application. One thing to note is that on the domestic application, if you check this box that my current mailing address is outside the United States, you do receive a confirmation dialog that will ask you to ensure that you do intend to enter an address that's outside the U.S. But in this case, since most users may be entering a current mailing address that is outside the U.S. because it is an international application, we are foregoing that confirmation dialog because we figured that most of the students are probably going to know what they're doing, so we don't need to continue asking them that particular question. Moving on, you might notice here that my permanent address for my account is actually an Australian address, so it's not a U.S. address. So we have another section down here that we've added for the prospective students, to enter their non-U.S. permanent home address. That being the case, one of the options that we've included here is another checkbox similar to the current mailing address. So if I check this, it rolls up and it just says my mailing address is the same as my permanent address. In this case, since I have a non-U.S. address as my permanent address, then my non-U.S. permanent home address that I would otherwise enter here, I have the option of checking this box and automatically populating that with my account's address that I created in my Open CCC account. If I had entered a domestic U.S. address as my permanent address for my Open CCC account, then this checkbox would not be here, and they would receive validation that they must enter their street address, their city, their state, and their country, so forth, for their non-U.S. permanent home address. If I check this box, it just rolls up, as it does with the current mailing address, with that similar feature above. When I uncheck it, I still have to enter the information, though it's auto-populated it with my information from my OpenCCC account. I suppose one minor thing that you might notice throughout the rest of the application that I just wanted to point out is also we've changed the format for the date of birth so that it explicitly states February 20th, 1989 instead of 1/20/89, since of course other countries don't use the same format for their addresses. So I just want to point that out as a difference that you'll see here and then throughout the rest of the application as we have to print out dates for the users to view. I think that's it on this page. I was going to go ahead and move on to the personal information page. As Patty said, if you have any questions, go ahead and post them to chat, and they will be compiled at the end if we don't have a chance to answer them here live at the end of the presentation. So on the personal information page, there are some differences, mostly around, there are fewer gender identity questions on the international application and more questions about the user's national identity. So we just have the simple, the standard gender question, are you male, female, or declined to state? That, I believe, is an optional question. So I'll just go ahead and say declined to state just in case. The other sections that are different from the domestic application is we are asking the user what their primary language is, and we have a listing of various alphabetized common languages that the users are going to be applying with. In this case, I'll go ahead and just select English because I'm kind of working off of an Australian user case as I go through this. But I just wanted to point out that we do have options for Spanish, Russian, Portuguese, Korean, Arabic, and so forth, just to point that out as a feature. Moving on, we do have a new section here for the nationality of the student. So we have their country of birth, and we also have their country of citizenship. For anybody who might be paying attention to this in particular, one of the things that we do have is we do have validation for their country of citizenship later on the visa dependence page, and I'll point that out when I get there. But I'll go ahead and select Australia as my country of citizenship. So just make a note of that when I move on to the visa dependence page in another couple of minutes here. The race ethnicity section here at the bottom of the personal information page is exactly the same as what we have on the domestic application. So it's a collection of boxes for the various races or ethnicities that the user might input. As with the domestic application, this section is also optional. And I'm not sure that there's anything else to really showcase on this page. As always, if you have any questions, go ahead and post them to chat. I know that there are people in there chatting at the moment. Go ahead and continue on to the education page, or excuse me, the contact page. So this page is completely different from anything that we have in the domestic application. We have a section for the user to enter their non-US contact information. All three of these numbers are optional for the user. We also have sections for the emergency contact. So that would be the emergency contact's first name, last name, relationship, their email address, and their contact address. And then we also have a section down here for the parent-guardian contact. So I'm going to go ahead and fill out the information here. I hope that you guys don't mind as I try to complete this page so that I can continue through the application unhindered. And then the email address is an optional field. However, the first name, last name, relationship, and telephone number are required for an emergency contact. And then their emergency contact address is required as well. So at this point, if I try to continue, I'll receive validation that I must specify the street address for my emergency contact. And then, of course, also, since this is a domestic address, I also have to fill in the information for my city, state, and zip code. And we do have USPS validation for that. So, for instance, if I were to enter a bad address here, I know that our USPS validation will attempt to change the value of that in some cases. For instance, if you enter a a zip code that doesn't match with the street address and the other information. And then also, I noticed that it will also edit the street address a little bit if you enter that in a format that it doesn't like. So it will, for instance, it will change east to a capital E and so forth. That is the same across all the applications, however. At this point, one thing, if you'll remember from the account mailing page, and I highlighted that my birth date for this user is February 20th, 1989, which would make them over 18 as of today. One of the features that we have is that if the user is under 18, and Patty, you can speak to this if you think it's something that I should actually show, but if the user is over 18, we do not require their parent-guardian contact information, even though we do allow them still the option of filling it in. We don't hide it from them as we do in some other cases where we have fields for minors versus non-minors. Since this particular user is over 18, if I continue at this point, I won't be prompted to enter any of the information from a parent-guardian contact. However, if I had a user that was under 18, I would be required to enter their first name, last name, relationship, telephone number, and then their address. If there are any questions on this page, of course, post them to the chat or this CCC Zoom room, or and then we'll either compile them and into a frequently asked questions that will be posted later on, or we'll try to answer them live with the various people in the chat room, or we'll try to answer them at the end of this presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on to the education page at this point. So on the education page, again, you might notice that the RDD here has been formatted more explicitly, so we're not conforming to a more US-centric date format. We've pared down the enrollment status choices for the users so that they only have the choice of first-time student of a U.S. college, transfer student from a U.S. college, or returning to this college. There's not too much to show in that regard, so I'll continue on to the secondary high school education level, which again is a little bit different from the various options that we have in the domestic application. There are fewer choices, and it's more centered upon the user being from an international perspective. So for instance, we list foreign secondary school, high school diploma, certificate of graduation as the first option, and then high school diploma, which I believe would be the more domestic option for the user, is kind of down here towards the latter half of the list. So if I choose foreign secondary school diploma, I get a choice to enter my secondary high school completion date, which is, I believe, required at this point. If I try to continue, then I am asked to enter my secondary high school completion date. So this is very similar to the domestic application. Now, one of the main changes that we have for the international application is we've added an English proficiency section. So this is a section where the colleges can customize the various tests that students may take to prove their English proficiency before coming to the college that they're applying to. The first item you might notice in this section is a link here that allows the colleges to put in completely customized text so that they're able to inform the users the various information about the English requirements that they have. So for instance, here we've added a description for our college, our test college, where we have our various various English proficiency tests listed here. I believe that this is mostly just a free-form text field on the administrator, which I believe Patty will be showing later on. So you can use HTML formatting techniques to make a list such as this and so forth. We have the radio button options here to allow the user to state, yes, I have taken the required English proficiency, or no, I have not taken it. If the user selects no, they're able to just continue from this section without being accosted further with any validation. If they select yes, then the section opens up and asks them for their test or qualification that they took for their English proficiency. So as I go through the various options, you'll see that the colleges have the option of asking the student for the date that they took or completed the test, and then what their total score was. For various options here, we've removed that just to demonstrate that for the various tests, the colleges are able to pick and choose which of these tests they're actually asking for these attributes on. So for instance, the TOEFL IBT test, we're requiring these fields. For TOEFL PBT, the same way. For the IE LTS test, we're not requiring it, and so forth, going down the list. So the colleges are able to pick and choose from the various options in the administrator and state which ones they want to have the score required for and which ones they want the date taken to be required for. And again, I believe Patty's going to be showing that in the latter half of this hour, that option in the administrator to make those choices for those tests. For those of you that remember the domestic application, here in the last high school, secondary high school attended section, we've pared this down to just two simple answers. I attended a secondary high school, or I did not attend a secondary high school. I'm sure from a common sense perspective, if you did not attend a secondary high school, then we don't require any more questions to be asked for that section. However, if you did attend a secondary high school, then the section opens up, much as the domestic application does, first asking you what country you attended your secondary high school education in, and then what your school or organization name was. And then what city that school or organization is located in. And then, of course, it asks for your attendance began, your attendance ended, as the domestic application does. And then we have an additional field here that's not on the domestic application for obvious reasons, just asking the user what the primary language of instruction was. And again, it's that same list that we had earlier on the personal information page, just with the various choices that the user can choose from. Aren't any changes in the college in this section here for the higher education where you state which degree you might have achieved before at a previous college. I'm going to go ahead and say no degree. However, you can see that if you choose an associate degree or a bachelor's degree, you are asked for your college education level completion date if you did achieve one of these degrees. However, if I state no degree, then I'm not prompted to enter a date for the degree that I did not obtain. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm sure it does. So I went ahead and selected that I had one college that I had attended. So this is very similar to the college's attended section in the domestic application. You're asked to select your country, so I'm going to go ahead and say Australia again. And then you have the option of filling out the college or university that you attended. And then you're asked for your attendance began, your attendance ended, which are, again, carryovers from the original apply or the domestic application. And then just asking for your degree, again, using the same 2-year or 4-year degree. However, I believe that for the international application, we've changed these from associate or bachelor degree to 2-year and 4-year degree, respectively. I'm going to go ahead and say no degree at this point. However, of course, if you choose a 2-year or 4-year degree, you are asked to enter the degree date, the date that you obtained that degree at this particular college that you're entering the information for. And then new for the international application, we are asking for the language of instruction at this college that you attended previously. I'm going to go ahead and say English again. And then we are also asking them to enter the name of the major that they were working towards at this college, just in the form of a free-form text box. So I apologize if I missed anything on this page. If anybody has any questions or Patty would like to weigh in, go ahead and weigh in, Patty. And if you have any questions, go ahead and add them to the chat.
Yeah, I don't think that there's anything else to add. I mean, this page is pretty straightforward. You know, there was a quick question in the chat. I'm not going to start answering questions in the chat yet, but about that summer term issue that I talked about in the last session. You know, that will not happen in this one either because there is no residency logic. So you know, so these fields aren't based on the RDD. So yeah, we won't have that issue here as well. So
I think as Patty showed in the last demo, I'll just touch on that briefly. One of the issues was that we were, in the domestic application, we do allow students who are currently in high school to select the option that they're currently in high school and going to co-attend at the community college. So you'll see here in the enrollment status that we don't have the option for the user to be attending a secondary or a high school while they're going to be enrolled at the college that they're applying to with this application. So I'll go ahead and move on to the visa dependence page at this point. So earlier, one of the things that I mentioned was that we do have cross-validation with the country. I'll go back to the personal information page just to bring it up. So here you'll notice on the personal information tab, the personal information page, I've selected my country of citizenship as Australia. So if I go back to the visa dependence page and I select Aruba as my country of issuance for my passport, and I continue at this point, I do give validation that states that the country selected for my passport does not match the country of citizenship selected that I entered on the personal information page. So that was just a small feature that I wanted to make sure that I touched on while I was on this page. So if I go ahead and select my country of issuance as Australia instead, we'll be able to continue, and it asks me for my my passport number, which states that basically this question that was previously an error is now corrected. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and enter my passport information. It's just the basic passport number and then the expiration date of that passport. There's not too much of interest here, though of course this is quite different from the way that the domestic application presents this on the citizenship military page. Because of course in the domestic application we have to account for a number of occurrences, most of which we're assuming that the users are going to be just domestic U.S. attendees, versus here we're definitely asking for passport information because by definition if they're an international student they're going to have passport information to enter. For the visa type, I'm going to go, we have the listing of all the various visa types that the State Department has. However, I'm going to choose an F1 visa type, which is probably going to be a fairly common occurrence with the users on this app. And then once I select a visa type, the issue date opens up, and then the visa expiration date opens up as well. So I'll go ahead and just enter this information so that I can continue from this page without being accosted by our validation. And then in the next section we have an entry for the I-94 admission number, which is something for as you're leaving as you're entering and exiting the country. It's just an admission value that the Department of Homeland Security, I believe, asks for. So these fields pertaining to the I-94 are completely optional, so I can continue up from this point without these fields being filled in. However, we do ask the users to enter their I-90, or at the very least, we provide the users a space to enter their I-94 admission number and then the expiration date associated with them. Different from the domestic application, we do allow space for the user to enter the number of dependents that they will have with them, all the way up to 10 dependents. However, I'm just going to demonstrate this with one dependent, so I'm going to roll all those back up to 1. At this point, I would be able to continue from the page, so I'll go ahead and show that. However, if I go back to the visa dependence page, and I enter the first name of this person, then it asks me to go ahead and fill out the information for the rest of the for the rest of the information for this particular dependent. And that validation works across, if I entered 2 dependents, then I would have the option of not entering any information for dependent 2. However, if I entered their first name, then I'd be required to enter all the other information about that dependent. So if I tried to enter Tasha's information without the date of birth or the other information, then it prompts me to go ahead and enter their information for her. I'm going to go ahead and just skip entering all that information because I'm not sure that that's particularly entertaining. But we're just asking for the dependent's date of birth, country of birth, their gender, which is just the standard male, female, or declined to state options, and then their relationship to the user who is applying to college, which would just be the only options they have are child or spouse. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on to the CVIS page. One thing I would like to mention is that since I selected an F1 visa type, and this is also true if I selected an M1 visa type, the CVIS tab is now available. If I were to select, for instance, an A1 visa type, and just save at this point, then you'll notice that the next tab is just the consent tab. Because if you are from any visa type, I apologize, Patty, if I'm mangling the business requirements around this, but if you have a visa type that's not an F1 or an M1 visa, you're not required to enter CVIS information as you go through the application.
That's right.
However, if I choose an F1 as I did earlier, or I select an M1 visa type, if I can find it, there it is, and I go ahead and continue, then I'm automatically taken to the CVIS page, which is thrown back into this flow, so that if you do have one of those 2 visa types, then you are prompted to enter that information, versus if you have the other visa types, you can completely skip it without even knowing that you would have had to do that. So if I check this box for I'm presently studying in the United States, I'm prompted to enter my CVIS number, which is a particular format. So if I enter, it's an N followed by 10 numerical digits. So if I enter an N with only 9 digits, and I hit the continue button, then it asks me to enter that 10th digit. So if I enter that 10th digit, then I'm able to continue, and it asks me to enter the number of OPT or CPT practical trainings that I am taking part in as a CVIS student. If I enter none, of course, this doesn't expand or prompt me to enter any OPT or CPT training. However, if I select 1 or 4 or more, then it rolls down with the various options that I'm allowed to enter for my OPT, CPT. At this point, if I just enter I'm able to continue at this point without having to enter the information for that OPT, CPT one. However, if I do enter a date for that one, then I'm prompted to go through and enter the information for the rest of or to fill out the information for that particular item that I just chose to fill in. I think that's all I was going to show on the CVIS page, so I'm going to go ahead and continue on to the consent tab. Of course, as always, just add any questions that you have to the chat. Now, this page is mostly about providing your consent to allow the college that you're applying to release your information as necessary to the various faculties that might require that information as you're applying to college as an international student to a college in the United States. So if you have the option of consent or do not consent, and then of course a lovely link to the privacy policy. And if I click the return button, it will bump me back into my application that I have in progress. I'll go ahead and just say that I consent. There's not too much to show in that feature. This page also provides me a space where I can enter the information for an agent to which I would prefer my college, in this case Unicon, to release the application status or immigrant status to this agent of my choosing. So if I check that box, that section rolls down and provides a space for a company name or a contact name, and then their phone, their street address in an international format, and then their country. I think that was, at this point, if you try to continue, you're asked to enter the agent's company name. And then you're asked to select the country. So that basically means that all of the other information, the contact name, the phone, the street address, the city, state, and postal code are optional, however, provides a space for the user to be able to enter all that information if they have an agent that they need to release this information to. Moving on to the review application page, we only have 2 more pages left, so I apologize that I've been a bit long-winded. This is very similar to the domestic application, just the same format that you're familiar with there and also in the Donohue waiver application. It's just a listing of all the various information that you've entered throughout your application process. And of course, we also have the option of saving the PDF version of this so that the user can save that as a software copy that they can reference later on once this application is over with. Other than that, there's not too much to show on this page. Of course, if you had an incomplete tab at this point, the review tab is available at any point when you're doing your application. However, if one of the tabs is incomplete, then this button would not show. However, all of the tabs are complete up to this point, so that basically means that the application is ready to submit, and that gives me the option of clicking this button to say that I reviewed the application. Which brings me to the Submit Your Application page, which there's not too much to show on this page. It's just a basic checkbox that allows the user to basically add a signature to this application to check that they have entered information that they believe is correct about themselves and that all of it is accurate to the best of their knowledge. There's not, as I said, there's not a lot to show on this page, so I'll go ahead and submit my application. And it's successfully completed. So you might notice here there are some differences between the domestic application and this, but it's basically the same confirmation page that we have for the domestic application as well as the Donohue waiver application. We provide the user with their confirmation number for their records in case they need to contact the help desk or the college about this. And then we also provide their submission date and time, again using the more international friendly format that we have throughout the rest of the application. And then just the various information that might be prudent for them to have at this point. At this point, if I click the Finish button, I would get dumped back on the My Applications page for the international application. And you'll see here that in this listing of my submitted international applications, I have my most recently submitted application to the summer 2016 international application college, or international application to the Unicon where I'm attending, and then I get my submitted date of 2/51. Now, that is in Pacific Standard Time, just in case anybody's wondering about the discrepancy between my Arizona time clock down here in the lower corner versus the time here in the submission. I believe that was all I wanted to present on the international application. Of course, Patty, if you have anything that you feel that I could expand upon, go ahead and let me know. However, I'll go ahead and hand it back to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tyler. I really appreciate it. It's all kind of a long application. So you did a great job. So everyone, I just can't tell you how bad I feel about the room capacity issue. It just figures. So if you are one of the people that got locked out and you're viewing this this weekend or Monday, please know that I am truly sorry. I tried to avoid this. I even had a 100-seat license, and then I had asked them to bump it up to 200, and now they've blocked people out at 50. So I apologize for that, and I'll try to get the recording up there before Monday if I can. So the last little piece that I wanted to do, and we don't have to spend too much time on this, but I did want to show those of you who are still with us some of the back-end configuration for the international app, because you may not be familiar with the administrator if you haven't been hands-on with the domestic app before. So just kind of a quick, let me make sure I share my screen right this time. So just kind of high-level stuff. For the application, first of all, if you're completely new to this, there's two environments for you, as admissions, as users of the CCCApply applications. There's a pilot environment, and we just changed this. It used to be called the QA environment or the beta environment, but it's basically a testing environment that mirrors production, so that you can test rules and go through the whole process and make sure that your rules are triggering correctly and are set up right before you implement them in the actual production environment. So you have a full feature testing environment called pilot, and then you have a full feature production environment called production. Obviously, your students are applying through production, and there's a production administrator. And if you are former Zap users, it's the equivalent of the control center. But there's two. There's an administrator, which is what I'm showing you now. I'm going to show you here. And then there's a separate tool called the report center. And I wasn't planning to go into that today. When you come on board and you implement the international app, we do a training for you in the report center. But I just wanted to tell you, it is completely separate than the administrator. It is not, it has a separate URL. It's actually a third-party application by Jaspersoft. And so what I want to show you is in the administrator. So behind the scenes, you need to understand the administrator and set up some key settings for your application for students to work. So I just want to give you a quick preview. I've logged into and I'm in the pilot administrator. When I first came in, I had to choose what application I wanted to administer. So for those of you who are domestic application users, you're familiar with this, and when you select the application to administer, you probably don't even see the international app here yet. That shows up when you have a user account set up for you. So you have a user account now, right? And for whatever you have authorization to see, probably it just says CCCApply and maybe Report Center. But you need a user account for each application. So if you're a bog fee waiver user, you have a bog fee waiver in your dropdown. So your user account kind of dictates what you see here. So when you come on board, and I'm going to talk just a minute about implementation as well. We'll get your user account expanded so that you can see the international app. You will select your college in the dropdown, and we're using College A. That's just one of our test colleges. But then you can see that some of the tabs appear. So here is where you set up your terms. And I'm not going to go into the details of how to set these terms up, but terms can be set up onesie-twosie, add a new term, and you would give it a term code, a description, a start date and an end date, and an open and a close date. And one quick note about this, and this has been an issue in the domestic app where colleges are actually editing or deleting terms, and that ends up being a huge problem if students actually submitted an application against the term. So please know that we're taking steps to prevent that in the future. We're going to remove the delete button for one thing, and then any term that has any submitted applications to it, you won't be able to edit it. If you want to get rid of a term, if you want it to not appear in the dropdown for the student, you just close it out. So we have a user guide that talks about how to, best practices for using the functionality in the administrator. But that was just a quick note to, note for future. Try not to ever edit a term that could possibly have been used by a student. If you want to get rid of it, close it out. So we'll talk more about that. So terms are entered here. Any term that's open will appear in the drop-down for students. That means that they can apply to that term. And these are defined by you. You determine the start and the end date, the open and close date. Or if you have a big list of terms, like this is a big list, you can import a list of terms from like an Excel file or a CSV file. If you're not sure how to do that, when you first come into the administrator, there'll be 1 or 2 test terms in there for you. You would just export that so that you have the format, you have the column layout, add your terms into the format, and then import that file back in here. So here's where terms are set up. Majors are also set up in the administrator. This, we just have one little placeholder here, but I mean, all of your majors, all of your programs are uploaded. Most colleges, they'll do the same thing. I would just put a check here and then export this one major so that I get the format. I've got, the major name, award type, program control number, top code, and I get the format, and then I can add all my big, huge hundreds of majors to that Excel file or CSV, and then quickly import that so you don't have to put them in one at a time. But if you wanted to put in a major one at a time, you can certainly do that. You would add a major code, a major name, which is the name that appears to the student in the major field of the application. You could set the dates of the major. If it's a major that you just want like a special, 2016 course, give it a code, and then say, I just want this major to align with my summer term. Actually, that's a 2015, my summer term. So you can either align a major to have no end date, give it a start date, have no end date, or align it to a specific term, or have an end date aligned to a specific term. So you have a lot of options for, the amount of time that major appears in your application. But let's just say this has no end date, and we'll have it start June 1st. The award type, these are the different award types, and we just added AAT and AST to this for the transferable degrees. You would give it an award type. Now the program control number and the top code are optional data fields right now. You can use them if you want, but just a kind of a word of caution, we may end up, or there may be an option to import the Chancellor's Office programs of study file into this administrator. Right now we have a work group that is trying to define how that would work. It is something that we've talked about. We're just still trying to figure out, something like that. We would still want to make sure that colleges that didn't want to do that had the option to not have the Chancellor's Office file. Some people might say, why wouldn't they? Well, some people don't. So we're still trying to figure out how we want to kind of redesign the administrator for that in the future. So required fields, optional fields, and then you can add that major. So here's where you set up terms, majors. Now the English proficiency section that you saw Tyler demonstrate, we just got done revising this section. It had a year ago, when we had to kind of pause on development for this application due to all kinds of reasons, some infrastructure issues, an accessibility audit that we had to make our top priority. The international application kind of took a hit, and that's why it's been delayed so long. But we just finally getting around to finishing this. Obviously, we're going to release it, but we had to fix this English proficiency section. So the one thing I wanted to add to what Tyler said was the feedback that I was getting from the International Advisory Committee was some colleges don't have an English proficiency requirement that's a test. They just don't have it anymore. And I think when we first started designing this, we were under the assumption that every college had a test. There was an English proficiency test requirement for sure. But now we're finding out, no, some colleges have other requirements. So we wanted to make it an option for you to not even have this appear on the application at all. So all of the information is going to be released in the data dictionary and the user guide. But if you didn't want the English proficiency section to appear at all on the education page, you would do two things. You would make sure there's no text in that hyperlink that appears to the student, and you would make sure that there's none of these predefined types were selected. You would just make sure you just come into your administrator and make sure that everything's turned off, and then that whole section doesn't even appear for students. If you do want it to appear and you do have a requirement, and you can see that these are the options that you have to choose from. We can't add any more to this list. So if you have something that's not here, you can use the other field. But the key to this is you, for lack of better functionality at this point, we had to make this work so that we could get this thing out. You use this help text area to tell your students what your requirements are. What are the prerequisites that they need, or the requirements they need. You might just put in here, we only, our only requirement is that you do X, Y, and Z, contact our office and provide proof. Whatever your requirements are, you would put them in this text box. So that's one of two indicators to the system that you want this to appear. Then you have to select one at least of these types. So again, if you don't do these tests, you could have just the other field appear, and the other field appears with just a text input box where you're telling them what you want them to put in the other field. Like, tell us, explain your experience with the English language over the last 3 years. Whatever it is, they would see the other in the drop-down menu, and then there would be a text field. So you'll get to play with this and better understand this March 10th when we roll to the pilot. But if you are selecting these tests that are predefined, like Tyler said, you can say, okay, so if you accept the TOEFL internet-based test, you select it, it'll appear in the drop-down, but then you still get to decide if you want that score field to show up. You could just have this be in the drop-down and not require a score. If you do want them to give you what score they gave, then you say yes, and then you can change these. But, it was just so convoluted. We had to take the validation out of this because we were hearing that, well, those scores change. We want to be able to put in what our low and high scores are. Well, that's fine, but you wouldn't be able to affect the validation and the logic behind those. We're just not set up for that at this point. So you could change the low and high, but the system right now isn't set up to be smart enough to give an error message if they don't fall within your low and high. So we had to work with what we had. So there's no validation. Basically, if you say that this is one of your accepted tests and you want the score, it'll ask for the score, and then if they put in 298, it's just, that's it, that you're going to collect that number. There's nothing that's going to say, whoa, that's wrong. It's going to just collect 298. And then there's the date completed field that does not appear on here, but it's tied to that score field, and it's going to take any date they put in. And that was another thing we had to fix on this because we heard from the advisory committee that some of your kids haven't taken the test yet. A, they don't know what your requirement is, and B, they haven't taken it It's scheduled for sometime in the future. And so we didn't want to block them by having some kind of date validation. So the date field will appear, but we're not going to try to, block them if they don't give us the date that we think they should, if that makes sense. So this will all be detailed perfectly for you if you decide to, we want to adopt the International App. We're ready to get started. And I'm going to show you what you need to do to get started. But when you get to this part in the setup, don't worry, you'll be able to better understand how all this works. So that's the English proficiency. Just quickly, just like the domestic app, you have the option to add supplemental questions and rules, just like the domestic app. And these two areas we feel this is how you're going to be able to make this the best application for you. After you just saw what Tyler demonstrated, this is what we have now. We can't make any more changes this year. This is our first release, our first iteration. It is what it is. So if there's something that's missing, we're going to help you create a supplemental question. It's perfect. It'll have its own page, its own tab down the side. So supplemental questions and rules are going to be how we customize this for you. So when you start your implementation and we start working with you on setup, think about what's missing and what questions you need on the app that aren't there and what rules you need. And so rules would be, if you're not familiar with rules, most of you probably are, but you could have like a real simple rule, like for every application that gets submitted, I want to send them a welcome email. Easy. We have the code here for you. So for every application submitted, and this is an XML code, and we'll help you with this, email the applicant, from our whatever email address, from admissions at View College, welcome to my college. Whatever, so there's email rules we can set up. If they need to submit documentation for XYZ, we can set up a rule. And you create your email, we'll help you with the rule, and we'll make sure that the student, that all of those business processes are in place so that this works for you. So supplemental questions, rules. Last couple things in here, resetting downloads. This is a IT function. Let's say the power goes out at your college or there's some hiccup with your download file. We don't really have a lot of hiccups like the Zap system did, because in the Zap system, from what I understand, you had to manually download. Come in the morning and say, okay, I want to download from last night, everything that came in last night. Our download process is completely automated. So your IT people who set up this project, it's going to be in the background. Your download jobs are set by an XML file. You determine how often you want to download. So like every 20 minutes, I want it to go out and look for all new applications and download them. So you don't see any of that. It's all in the background. But if there's a need to download an application again, then this is where you would do it. You would get the confirmation number of the application from the report center, throw it in here, and the confirmation numbers for international apps are going to start with an INT. This probably won't show up, because I made that up. But you put in the application number there, it'll find it, and then it'll give you another chance to say, yes, re-download this. And then it just changes the status to not downloaded yet. And then the next time your job file goes out looking for new apps, it'll grab it and re-download it. And then the last thing that you do in here is set up users. So one quick note about users, because we have two tools, right? The administrator, we consider the tool that very few people get into, right? Your director or a couple key staff and your IT have access, but it gets set up once and then you don't really touch it, maybe for 6 months or come in once in a while to add a new term or to tweak something, but this is not the day-to-day tool. The report center is. So we see the report center being, if you aren't using your student information system for reporting or for looking up applications, because all that process won't change. You can use the report center, and the report center is on real time. The second, or the instant a student applies, the report center gets a copy of that application, and you can look them up. You can run a report. You can export a report. So the report center is where just every one of your staff, anybody that you want to have access to the report center, is going to have a user account. Okay, so I did that wrong. Let's just look up. We're in the junk data. None of this is actual student information. What happened here? Oh, this is the new CI environment. That might be why. Anyway, you can have 20, 30, 80 users have an account for the report center. But that's just a suggestion. Probably best to keep hands out of the administrator, especially for that note that I said earlier about you don't want anyone messing with your terms or your majors. Get them in there, make sure that they don't ever get deleted. There's a proper way to close them so that there's no black hole in submitted application land. So that was kind of a real quick look at the administrator because I've gone over a little bit. But let's go back to what I wanted to do real quick was, I know you couldn't see my screen before, so I wanted to just let you see this timeline, and I'll repeat it. Again, today's the 19th, so we're looking at the application. There's 3 weeks, 3 weeks? Yeah, just about 3 weeks between now and March 10th. And that's the key date of when this international app will be on the pilot site. You can, that's where you can start playing with it and really decide when do you want to start setting up and, implementing it. That date, again, the annual report will be there. The data dictionary will be there. And, you'll have everything you need, all your tools to build your download file, all the details on how to set up the administrator, and the actual code will be out in the pilot site. The launch will be on Thursday, March 31st. So it doesn't mean you have to be ready for the launch, right? It's just that that's the earliest date that you could actually use it with students. So that's 6 weeks away. If you hustle and you really, really want it to be ready when it launches, it depends on how much effort and time and resources you have to put into it in 6 weeks, but it can be done. The reason I say that is because if you're familiar with the setup of the domestic app, it took a while, right? Because it was the first time, and you had to set up the shibboleth IDP, setting up your single sign-on access, and building your download file, and setting up the administrator for the first time, and you had the learning curve, and we had to make sure that the branding was in place. Well, what makes the BOG and the international so much easier is you're already live on the domestic app, so a lot of things are already in place. Your IDP is already set up. You don't have to do the shibboleth setup again. Your branding's already in place. Your contract's already signed. And your download client is already in place. All you need to do is now create a new download file for the international data fields. That's the bulk of the project. So if you contact me tomorrow and say, we're ready to get started, I will schedule an overview meeting with you and give you a checklist and say, here's what you got to do. And then it's up to you, to get started on the download file. And it's exactly the same as the domestic app. It's just that you're going to be looking for those fields instead of the other fields. It's the same process, the same format XML, the same job file XML. So right now on the CCCApply project site, let me go back up to the top. There is this information is there, cccapplyproject.org. And this is the, for staff users of CCCApply. If you click on the Open CCCApply project, we have getting started information, getting started with the international app. And it's not pretty, it's kind of wordy, but this tells you everything that you need to do. And then getting the meeting scheduled. And then from there, we're working with you one-on-one. And again, it's less work, honestly, than the initial setup of the domestic app. And then there's more on here. The go live procedure. Sorry, it's a lot easier to go live with the domestic app, but there's still things to consider and things to get ready. So the sooner you want to get started, the better. There's other things on this website too. All of the events. Again, if you haven't registered for the workshop, here's the annual workshop information. And again, if you haven't registered and you want to, I would do it soon. We only have 25 spaces left, and we wouldn't want to block you. Wouldn't want to block you from that. Just kidding. Sorry. And let's see, what else is on here? Oh, the date of the annual update on March 31st. This is where we're going to put the annual report and the data dictionary and anything else related to the release. The final thing I want to point out before we let you go is the new CCC Technology.info website. If you click on support, we'll talk about the hours that we have staff monitoring the site and available to help you. And then information on how, what is it? How do we do it? How do we register? Submitting change requests to the site, submitting a bug request. We're really, really trying to use this for a couple reasons. People got really used to just coming to me directly for everything, and things were dropping through the cracks. I can't be IT as well, and we really want to make sure that you're supported in a prompt manner. So go to the support site, which I have up, register for an account. This category page called CCCApply System Alerts. This is where we're going to post something that affects all colleges, no matter what application you're using. For example, okay, so that was this, but yesterday, for example, we found out that our servers, there was a little outage with our servers for 4 minutes due to a DOS attack. Kind of scary. We weren't the target of it, but if you got any students saying, hey, something's wrong with the site, go to this site and we will provide information. And you might be the first one telling us some stuff. So let me go back to this page here. So, and to set up to get automatic notifications, automatic email notifications, you would just follow any page, any post, or any section that you want. It's easier than that, but it's just like an RSS feed. You could follow a particular post that somebody, let's see, who's this? Urgent, students can't log into their application. If you went to the site and said, same with me, okay, they've already answered her, I'm just going to follow this post. And how do I follow it? Right here. So then the next time our tech support gives an update on that post, you're going to get a notification. So please take the time to do that. Information on how to do that on the project site. Again, those key dates, and I think that's just about it. So let me check in with our folks here monitoring the chat. Do we have anything that's real a real good question or something urgent. Otherwise, we're going to aggregate all those answers and put them on the project site when I put the recording up there. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to the chat here. Did I lose the session? What happened? Tyler, you there?
Yeah, I think that if you're screen sharing, you're not able to see the chat messages.
Oh, okay, good. Woo! So that makes me happy. Let me stop screen sharing for a sec. How do I do that? Did I just do that? Wait a minute. Okay. Back to meeting. Oh, here we go. Here's the chat. Okay, so it looks like some people are leaving already. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Is the format requirements for the text box in the documentation, such as when to use XML? Yeah, so all of the implementation requirements will be given to you when you start setting up the project. Hopefully I answered that. Do they have to enter the I-20 issuing school or expiration date? That is not part of the application right now. So that's something that a supplemental question would be used for. And in fact, thank you for asking that because, I've said, please sign up for the workshop. One of the sessions of the workshop is going to be strictly international app. And what we're planning to do, a quick demo, not an hour-long demo, a quick demo of the application, but then we're going to use that workshop time to brainstorm and come up with supplemental questions and rules that we can build as templates so that everybody can use them. If having the I-20 issuing school field on the application is like a must-have, then we can build the code out for that question and make sure everybody gets it, and then all they have to do is upload that into the supplemental question area. So we really, really hope that we can make that more of a hands-on workshop as opposed to just a demo. So anything that you might be worried about right now as far as what we don't have in the application, think supplemental questions. We can do it. We can make this the best application for what it is right now. So that's my advice on that. And it looks like there's not that many questions in here. Somebody had asked about, requiring the score on the English proficiency. And again, I showed that, yes, you can do that. Those are settings that you implement in the administrator. So I'm going to go ahead and let you go and stop the session and just send you an email with the FAQ and the recording. If you have a colleague that was blocked, please convey my humble apologies for that. It can't be fun to clear your schedule for something and then get blocked, so I apologize. So thanks again, everyone. Enjoy your day, and we'll see you next time.